last week's feedback show was the record, over 5 hours. And yeah, that's a little long, guys. I mean, it wasn't just a volume of emails, but it was like the really longer emails as well. This week isn't going to go that long, but tell you what we're going to do. Like going forward, if we ever get to that point where it's going to be that long, we're just going to have to break it up into 2 shows because 5 hours is a lot to ask of anyone to listen to a podcast, especially when it is me waxing on and prattling on and doing all of my ramblings and whatnot and responses. It's always great to talk discussion, but yeah, we gotta be a little bit more reasonable with respect to that length. Alex actually brought up a suggestion that we'll get to later on when we get to his emails, but obviously we'll start this week off as we do customarily with our leadoff hitter, and that of course is John R., who's got a couple of emails today. And this first one, which is entitled email number 1, wait, what? I have to address something that this got lost in translation because he sends a couple of GIFs on this first question. And then in all caps, he types, "You've never watched South Park before?" No, that's not true. Not true. I have watched South Park. I've watched a smattering of South Park. I don't watch it regularly because I don't care for it. It is not my thing. But all that being said, here's what John had to say. He says, "I didn't just miss the boat, I missed the Titanic." Oh, wait, no, that sank. "You missed the Olympic, the Titanic's twin with South Park. It is the funniest show that's ever existed," he says. I will respectfully disagree with you on that vehemently, John. He says, "I've watched every episode. I haven't done that with The Simpsons, SpongeBob, Family Guy, Seinfeld, That 70s Show, King of the Hill, or Scrubs." So yeah, John R. is a huge fan of South Park, and that's great. It's all subjective. It's awesome. Listen, I've watched a handful of episodes, and I've watched the movie Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. Not my thing. Just not my brand of humor whatsoever. Look, I will admit that the one episode where like Mickey Mouse was like, bullying the Jonas Brothers, and was that the same episode as the one? No, that was a different one about Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of Crystal Skull. Okay, those ones, that and The Simpsons did it. Like those 3 episodes, like okay, here and there, but by and large, no. The brand of animation, the kind of jokes that they do, no, it's lowest common denominator stuff, in my humble opinion. Not my kind of humor, not at all. And let's see, of any of the shows that you listed that you haven't watched all of, okay, I haven't watched every episode of The Simpsons, but come on, be fair now. That's like 35, 36 seasons, okay? I've seen all of the first 24 seasons of The Simpsons, and I've consistently rewatched seasons 1 through 10 because that's like the strongest seasons of The Simpsons. I missed the boat on SpongeBob because that's like after my time. Family Guy, I watched that religiously through the first 5 or 6 seasons. Never really got into Seinfeld, even though I've watched a couple of episodes here and there. Also never really got into That 70s Show, King of the Hill, or Scrubs. But I have tried episodes of all of these shows. Humor is extremely subjective because while I haven't watched a whole lot of episodes of any of those shows, I have rewatched all 11 seasons of Frasier multiple times. I've rewatched all 12 seasons of Big Bang Theory multiple times. And older sitcoms like The Mary Tyler Moore Show or WKRP in Cincinnati, all the MTM stuff. I've watched those like a lot over and over again. And it's just, humor is subjective. It just is. And South Park, not my brand. But no, I want to clear that up, John. I absolutely have seen South Park. I don't care for it. It's not my thing. And I do not agree with you that it is the funniest show that's ever existed. It is not. Not in my opinion. Not subjectively speaking. That is not how I feel about it in that regard. So, but continuing, he says, "I'm sorry for flip-flopping with Patreon, but I promise you the day you announce you'll be reviewing South Park, I'll be your patron for at least 5 years, no cancellations, but please let me know, okay? You got to see the movie Bigger, Longer, and Uncut at least." I have seen it. He says the relationship between Satan and Saddam Malone is just too funny to skip. No, just wasn't my thing. The whole Terrence and Phillip thing and the Blame Canada, not my thing. Just didn't get it. So is there anything else, though, like other than South Park that I can review that can get you to be a patron for 5 years? Let me know. Let me know if there's something else. I'll think about it. I'll consider it. But no, unfortunately not South Park. Not going to work out in that regard. He also said 2.5 hours has to be flight chat record. I'm going to keep it brief this week. No more than 2. Was his might have been 2.5 hours. I don't know. I forget how long it went, but he wrote like 7 emails last week, which add up to like one Dorsey-sized email or one Amr-sized email in this regard. So maybe, but either way, he's going to keep it shorter. Well, he's already sent like half the amount of emails, so let's see how much longer this first one goes, because he's got a few more points here in this first one. He's got songs in the key of wisdom number 2, music and the movies. Okay, this is intriguing. He says sometimes the score to a film soundtrack can be considered a work of art. Whether we hear the horn for The Godfather, John Williams' orchestra in Star Wars, Indiana Jones, or Superman, Danny Elfman's strings and flutes, I'll add flutes, Michael Giacchino's scores, but I have to know what scene in a movie moves you to tears with music, both as a needle drop and the score. For score, he says anything with Rhapsody in Blue, especially when they play that violin solo, whether it be Woody Allen's Manhattan or Fantasia 2000 or something else. Poetic use. As for a needle drop, he says it's a tie. Jack Nicholson playing Monty Python's Always Look on the Bright Side of Life in As Good as It Gets, cheering up his neighbor's dog. The other one, he says, this one's corny, but as I get older, it hits me more. When Austin confesses to Vanessa he shagged a lot of vagina and is hurt how out of touch he is with the current times. Burt Bacharach's What the World Needs Now plays through a montage of what Austin missed when he was frozen. It was both funny and sad at the same time. The song's used pretty thematically throughout the film. It was even used again in the third film. As someone who suffers from FOMO, fear of missing out, it gets me more. Are there any movies that do that for you? Oh, and I notice Gunn is a master at that with all of his comic book movies, and they're pretty close to what I got watching Austin Powers. So I got to think about this for a second because needle drops, I don't know so much if needle drops there's got to be some, right? There's got to be a needle drop or two here that like has triggered some emotional stuff. But I'm more inclined to think of moments in movies. Like if I'm thinking of like moments in movies, I know that there is a piece in AI, artificial intelligence, that I've gotten emotional over before. It's called Where Dreams Are Born, and I have to rewatch AI because I don't entirely remember what point in the movie like it happens, and it's been a long time since I've watched AI, and I've only watched it once all the way through, and I don't even remember if I finished it all the way to the end. But that piece, Where Dreams Are Born by John Williams from AI, like that is a very I've listened to that separately outside of the movie, and that is a very emotional piece. Yes, I will definitely say that. Another one that just popped into my head from Michael Giacchino is from the first Kelvin Timeline Star Trek film in 2009. It's a track called Labor of Love. And I remember very vividly what this scene is because it's literally the birth of James T. Kirk. And if you follow it, I mean, this one hits on a number of emotional levels. In fact, quite honestly, I probably get more emotional thinking about it now than I did the AI piece because you got to understand the context. And mind you, I've been a Trekkie since I was 9, right? My whole life, essentially. I've been a Star Trek fan. I know the lore and all the history of James Tiberius Kirk, right? And so when it came to retelling that story and the way they do it in the Kelvin timeline, for people who don't know, like it starts off that, aboard the USS Kelvin, his father George is serving as first officer, and he's placed in charge of the ship when Nero's ship, the Narada, travels back in time inadvertently and threatens them. And so in the middle of the attack, in the middle of the battle, the ship has to evacuate and George is still in charge. And what it is he's got to let his wife Winona, who is pregnant and, going into labor at this point in time, he's got to let her escape the ship while he stays aboard the Kelvin to ward off the Narada and keep them away from the shuttlecraft and escape pods that are leaving the Kelvin as it is being destroyed. And he's talking to her over the communicator while she's leaving, and she's almost in tears at this point, like he has to be here, you've got to get off the ship, you have to be here. And in the middle of this, she goes into labor, and the doctor's like, I need you to push really hard, and like she just starts screaming. And it's Jennifer Morrison, so that's even extra because at the time, huge House fan, I was like religiously watching that show, and so the fact that she was playing Kirk's mother in this, that just added even more to it. But there's a point in the movie where right after she screams in labor, like all the sound effects go dead and it's just music, and it is literally, we are witnessing the birth of a hero. We're witnessing the birth of James T. Kirk, and he is literally coming into this world doing the one thing that his character has done his entire life, and that is cheat death. That is the one thing that James T. Kirk is, one of the things that he's most well known for in the prime timeline, is his ability to cheat death. And it was just absolutely poetic and fitting that his first official act of being born is literally cheating death. And so all of the emotions wrapped up in just the violins and the orchestra, and it's just a very, very heart wrenching piece because he's being born at the same time that his father is dying. And his father is leaving him, like doing what he can to safeguard him and his mother to make certain that they have a full life, that they live out. And it's a departure from the prime timeline, because in the prime timeline, Jim knew both of his parents. He knew his grew up with his father and his mother. So now we're seeing a Kirk being deprived of his father through heroic means, through crazy like gut wrenching means, and just that piece of music, "Labor of Love," is just that's it gets it going. Yes, definitely. It's extremely emotional. So yeah, I'm right there with you as far as like emotional musical cues. Those are the two big ones. That AI piece, where Dreams Are Born, and then certainly Labor of Love from Michael Giacchino from the first Kelvin timeline Star Trek film. Both very emotional. I could think of a bunch of others if I go through it, but those are the two that immediately stand out to me as like incredibly emotional pieces of music. I remember the third time that I saw the second time rather that I saw the Star Trek 2009, the Kelvin timeline film. I saw that movie 4 times in one weekend, which is still like my proximity record. I've seen 3 movies 4 times at the theater: Star Trek 2009, the first Avengers film, and now Superman this year. I've seen all 3 of those 4 times in the theater. But that's the one, that Star Trek movie. I saw that 4 times in 4 days, like 4 days in a row. I saw that, and the second time I saw it, my one buddy Flynn, may he rest in peace, Jason Flynn. He, I remember he was crying, like he teared up, like, and that's right before the opening credits hit, right before the opening credits, like of the movie hit, and the Kelvin is destroyed, and Kirk is there with his mother, like as a newborn, like that hit him, and I mean it hit me. Like I wasn't quite as emotional at that time, but it is one that, as I've thought of it, it's definitely been like an emotional moment, thinking of it going forward, right? Just the implications of that, and the Kelvin timeline just did so much right with respect to subjectively speaking. Of course, I just love a lot of what they did with the Star Trek lore in those films, and so yeah, I'll always remember that one for sure. I gotcha. All right, so this third one for John's first email. He says, "I know you said I'm too nice to people, and yeah, that's true. Both me and Tammy allowed people to take advantage of us because we're both people pleasers who are afraid to say no. I think it's because we know we've been bad in the past and we're trying not to be too inconsiderate of other people because we have in the past. But I see there's a limit to that," he says. "We can't let people trick us, blackmail us, guilt trip us into making us feel miserable. We both realize that we have to set boundaries with other people who make us feel bad for our disabilities. And yet, your Superman is also a people pleaser, and yet he does have limits. When people and creatures are wronged, his morality surpasses his trepidations of how he personally feels about him. Superman would be the type of guy who would stick up for Lex Luthor if he was framed for murder, even though he has murdered someone in the past. You know that old saying, life isn't fair? It's not. But can't we at least try to make it fair?" Agreed. I completely agree. But it's one of those things where the reason I said that, John, obviously, is because I know that there are bots and trolls and people with absolute bad faith intentions that are just trying to get a rise out of you and just trying to get you to engage. And yeah, you are just like, those people don't deserve any niceness because they're already coming in with bad intentions, right? It's one thing if you're trying to reason with somebody that you know, or somebody that like has better intentions or is at least trying to be nice. But the vast majority of people, a lot of people on social media, are not trying to be nice. They're just trying to rage bait. They're trying to, go for the engagement. And those people don't deserve niceness whatsoever. And you don't know those people personally, right? Like, it's different when it's somebody like in person. And you have to be careful with people in person as well because you can't let them step all over you either. But certainly on social media, over the internet, no, they don't deserve your like courtesy. I guess I was trying to think of the right word to put. They don't deserve your courtesy. They don't deserve your consideration because they're not willing to extend it themselves. And so, yeah, that's where I say it is definitely not necessary to be so nice to those people whatsoever. Because if they're already coming at this from a bad faith perspective, then your niceness will fall on deaf ears and will be completely wasted. It's wasted energy in that regard. So I'm with you. Life isn't fair, but we can at least try to make it fair. And that's fine, but we also have to like identify and acknowledge who's not interested in fairness whatsoever and who's just trying to piss us off. And so that's why I said that with respect to being too nice to people. He says, "Also, I think it's really cool you're using AI now to read descriptions of emails. It's a smart way to know if a certain topic is controversial and may have to avoid. Glad it hasn't happened yet." Well, I'm not like a proponent of AI in that sense. It's just that this is a feature that Google has started to include in Gmail, this Gemini feature, and if it gives a summary, I find it more amusing than anything. It's not really to like safeguard for controversial topics because I'm not above talking about controversial topics. I'm not, and you know, I think prior email sessions like this, prior feedback sessions, would prove that. We've talked about some political stuff. We've talked about socioeconomic stuff. Like I'm not fearful of that. I'm not a political or a socioeconomic podcaster, but I won't shy away from it, especially if it intersects with movies, TV, and other sort of media, which it does tend to do more often than not. So yeah, but I really the whole Gemini like AI thing, I just find it amusing. I just find it very amusing. The summaries that it provides for all of your emails. When it does, it doesn't always provide summaries. It hasn't provided one for yours yet, John, to be honest with you. And getting into your second email, which you titled FC email number 2, looks like I was right. Okay. But no, Gemini did not give an AI summary. It does not give an AI summary for everybody's emails. And I feel like maybe the longer ones, or maybe the ones that are written more in paragraph form and not so much bullet pointed. Yours tend to be bullet pointed, John. So I think that's probably why it doesn't do it. Although, actually, I'm looking at this. It didn't give me the option on the first email. Hey, let me just double check. The first email, okay, I guess it does give an option where you can summarize. This is how you know I don't use it. Because you can summarize it. Like, or some of them, the summaries are just offered right then and there. Like, if I hit summarize this email, it tells me that this email is you discussing upcoming DC films and potential release dates and asks about relationships ending due to political differences. Okay, well, that's a potentially controversial topic, but whatever. We're going to dive into it. Here are your 4 bullet points. For your second email, John. First, you said, so a super family movie and Wonder Woman rather, are next, it seems. This is pretty good news. I have to wonder what the release schedule for Brave and the Bold will be. 2029 seems like a long time from now. I think 2028 is a good goal. I have this sense that a Justice League film will be either 2029 or 2030. Zaslav didn't like it took Superman 12 years. I would imagine 12 years is a long time for Justice League. 9 years, technically. Well, first of all, I don't think David Zaslav cares nearly as much about a Justice League film as he does about a Superman film, because I don't get the impression that he is that big into the massive team-ups, right? And the reason I say that is because whatever James Gunn and Peter Safran's plan is, David Zaslav is bought into it. David Zaslav is continuing with that, like is holding up that, not holding up, but like like allowing it. Like he's the only one that could kibosh it or say something about it, but he's staying out of their way. Similar to how Bob Iger is staying out of Kevin Feige's way. Same difference in that regard, which of course was different than Bob Chapek. Bob Chapek, the 2 years he was involved, he gave Kevin Feige a mandate for content, and Feige followed it in that regard, right? And you would think that if a mandate were to come down that Zaslav and from Zaslav rather, that Safran and Gunn may follow it, but if he produced an 8 to 10 year plan, then whatever plans he has for Justice League you would think already be included in that plan. But I would caution this, based on what he's described of this Gods and Monsters plan, I don't think we should be looking at it traditionally to be expecting a Justice League film. I don't. And I feel like a lot of fans, they're going to go into this, again, our frame of reference being the MCU, they're going to be like, okay, when's the Justice League going to show up? When's the Justice League going to pop up? We were talking about this the other day a little bit on Vodka Stream, and William from Sci-Fi Center, he was talking about how he doesn't like he's okay with like James Gunn, his preference on the Justice League, but he doesn't like it personally. And the Justice League, I guess, that James Gunn seems to favor is the Justice League International lineup that involves a number of other characters, a few of whom have already been introduced into in Superman, and it's not, I guess, the traditional lineup, if you will, right? The traditional lineup of Batman, Superman, Green Lantern, Hawkgirl, or maybe Hawkgirl, but not Martian Manhunter, Flash, Aquaman, those people, right? Exactly. Like it seems like the presumption is that he's going to be less traditional Justice League and more Justice League International. But I would say I'm not willing to presume that we will see a Justice League film by 2029 or 2030. And I don't think that there is a mandate for that. I really don't. I don't think Zaslav cares like that. I think Zaslav cares at the end of the day how successful the brand is going to be. And if the rebranding goes as well for the remainder of the DCU, for DC Studios, as well as the Superman rebrand has gone, then I don't think there will be any mandates. I think David Zaslav will be just fine in that regard. Now, as far as The Brave and the Bold is concerned, and Wonder Woman, I would say within the next 2 to 3 years, certainly. I think The Brave and the Bold is definitely going to be post the Batman Part 2, right? So if that's 2027, then The Brave and the Bold could be as early as 2028 or 2029. And I know 2029 seems like a long time from now. It'll be here before we know it. It will. It'll be here before we know it. How long did it seem before Superman was going to come out? How long ago, right? Like we knew that James Gunn and Peter Safran had taken over DC Studios. We knew that they were given the keys to that kingdom in 2022, not too long after Black Adam released, right? And at that point, when we found out that Henry Cavill wasn't going to be Superman anymore, that was 3 years ago. 3 years ago, and now we have seen that Superman. We've seen that film, right? We're many of us, myself included, are now waiting for that film to be released in glorious steelbook, which I've already pre-ordered in that regard, right? So it'll be here before you know it, to be honest with you. And not that I'm necessarily trying to speed up time or anything, but I'm just saying, it seems like a long time. But let's see what else we have coming before then. We already know that next year will bring us Supergirl and Clayface, and then we will have the Batman Part 2 in 2027, along with whatever else is going to be 2027 with respect to cinematic DC films, right? Cinematic DC studios in that regard. But we'll have shows as well. We've got Peacemaker coming up here very soon. We will have Lanterns, after that, right? So let's just, it'll be here before we know it. I don't want to act like it's going to take that far off, but I don't feel that there is a mandate for when we're going to get a Justice League film, the same way that there may have been a consideration, because Superman's different. Superman's a solo hero, and he just has not gotten the same respect from the studio that Batman has, or like some of the others have had, or Batman especially. Superman should have been at very least much closer to Batman's level in terms of cinematic appearances, and not so much of a gap in between movies, right? 12 years, 19 years. No, that's ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. There was no excuse for that, no justification for that with Warner Brothers and Superman. So that's different than the Justice League, because we've still only had one incarnation of the Justice League on the big screen. We will have another. We will. We'll have another, but I don't think there's going to be a mandate, because I don't think that the DCU is going to go in that same fashion as the MCU has. And so I would caution you, John, and I would caution others not to necessarily expect a timeline like that in that regard. So just my thoughts on that. We'll see if I'm right or not. So number 2 for the second email, John says, so there's been a phenomenon that's been going on for a while, maybe since 2016 or 2020, couples breaking up or getting divorced based on how they voted. Do you think this is justified, or do you think couples therapy would have been able to fix this? John, I think personally it's very justified, especially with the way that politics has changed in the last 9 years, because it's no longer a case of truly lesser of two evils in this regard. Neither political party is perfect, but one political party has absolutely shown themselves to be far more dangerous and far more tolerant of bigotry and racism than the other. Like, openly speaking, I don't think that's a question whatsoever. And people can argue one way or the other about it, and people can do the whole both sides bullshit, but no, absolutely not. One is far worse than the other. And so if that's, when we talk about especially things that are happening now in reality, right? When we talk about rights being repealed, when we talk about, protections being eliminated, when we talk about the Constitution being trod upon, if you will, by one particular political party, yeah, no, it's a matter of life and death at this point for a lot of these people, like for women's rights, for minority rights, right? For LGBTQ plus rights, like that absolutely is strong enough, right? There's no amount of couples therapy that can fix one couple, like a one side of it thinking the other one shouldn't exist, or the other one shouldn't have rights. Okay, if you've got a man and a woman, and that man believes that that woman should be barefoot and pregnant in the home for the rest of her days, not earning an income, and only being a baby maker for that person, well, no, divorce. Absolutely divorce. If you have an interracial couple, but one of them, whoever the non-white person, right? If the other one individual, if the white individual in that couple believes that the non-white person shouldn't have rights, should be gerrymandered into hell based on where they live, voting wise or whatnot, no, divorce, absolutely, right? It is most certainly justification. I think the people that act like there is no justification are the ones that are looking for an excuse to be assholes. They want justification to continue to be a toxic piece of shit to whoever their significant other is, along whatever lines in that regard. So, yeah, I think politics has changed. There was a time, I'd even go back to the days of W, right? The days of George W. Bush. And there were a number of things that George W. Bush did and said. I didn't like him. I didn't like his cabinet, right? But at least back then, like, it wasn't as overt. It wasn't as blatant, right? One of the things that I remember George W. Bush saying in one of the State of the Union addresses, was he talked about how the terrorists that took out the World Trade Center, 9/11, he said that they were not actual disciples of Allah, that they blaspheme the Islamic religion, and that they were extremists, and that they were not to be taken as the actual like representation of what that religion is supposed to be. Like, and it was a crazy like juxtaposition because religious freedom is a very like touchy topic these days, and that was that president, for all the other stuff going on with the Patriot Act and Homeland Security and whatnot, for all the other stuff going on in that presidency, for all the other terrible people that existed or that were in that cabinet and whatnot, and for the war in Iraq and all that, he was still saying that. And it's like, okay, that was a point where back then you could just say it was political differences between parties. That's changed. That's absolutely changed. And I don't see how people can look at what is said, people can look at what is being done and suggest that it hasn't changed. Because there are things that are happening now with the current regime in charge that didn't happen under W's watch. And he had 8 years. He had 8 years and a war, and 9/11, worst terrorist attack, to date in this country, right? And yet there are things that are happening now that didn't happen then, that weren't the case then, So to me, I think absolutely there's justification for it. If the differences are that morally bankrupt, if they're that morally apart between the two, yes, no amount of counseling is going to fix that. It just isn't, right? And it's also on a case by case basis, John. In some cases, counseling might fix it, but it depends on the situation. It depends on how strongly either side feels, right? And ultimately, it's up to the couple. Ultimately, it's their decision, not ours, to pass judgment on whatever it is or however it is that they feel. I would just tell you that most certainly in this day and age, political, differences, if you will, how a person votes, most certainly it's a justification, because literally today your vote signifies a lot more of your morality and signifies a lot more of where you stand as a person than it did before. And anybody who thinks that it doesn't, anybody who just looks at it as a political decision, has their head in the sand, as far as I'm concerned, and does not understand the severity of what your vote means now compared to what it might have meant beforehand when the lines were more blurred. The lines are not blurred now. They're not. They are not. It is clear cut over the last 9 years specifically how different either side of the political spectrum is with respect to partisan politics in this particular country. So, yeah, there's my potentially controversial and loaded answer for that. If anybody here disagrees, hey, you're welcome to, and we can have at it. But I feel very strongly about this one, so we'll see how far that goes. Entirely up to you. All right, number 3. John says, slight what if scenario here. Do you think NC-17 movies will make a comeback? And if so, what comic book film would justify that rating? Perhaps an indie title? Mouse? A graphic novel allegory where mice are represented as Jews and cats are represented as Nazis? John, I don't think a single comic book movie will ever be rated NC-17. Is there even one? Not that I'm aware of, but the reason is because these studios don't want to restrict their audience any further, or already restricts their audience enough to adults, over the age of 17. NC-17 is worse, right? NC-17 replaced the X rating, which was typically reserved for pornography. And they've changed it now to also include graphic violence, right? Extreme violence and unrated stuff. But there's no reason that any studio would support that or do that. NC-17 is not a rating to chase after whatsoever. So was there something that prompted you to ask if NC-17 movies will make a comeback? Because have they started? When's the last time we saw a movie that was rated NC-17? I'm looking here, and I'm going through, and mind you, ratings are all very like, the MPAA standards of rating films is extremely arbitrary and, very Bible thumpery and whatnot, for lack of a better way to put it. The most recent film, and this is not a complete list, and Wikipedia, does indicate that this is not a complete list, but it looks like the most recent film to receive an NC-17 rating is Blonde in 2022. So that was 3 years ago, and this is a Netflix film, if I'm not mistaken, right? So this wasn't even theatrically released. Rated NC-17 for some sexual content. It's the first NC-17 rated film to be released on Netflix. So it even took that long for Netflix, a streamer, to release a film with that rating, right? This is not a film, this is not a rating that any studio is chasing after. So no, I don't expect a resurgence. I don't expect any type of surgence whatsoever of NC-17 movies whatsoever. No, that is a serious, like that's cutting into your business. And these studios, like, R is as far as they'll go. R you can make money with, right? Joker proved that. Like we've seen other R-rated movies prove that. Even the Matrix trilogy way back in the day that proved that R-rated movies can most certainly make money, right? It's less money than you would make on a PG-13 film, no doubt. But yeah, I don't see NC-17 being a rating at all that these studios are going to even remotely try to chase. They'll want to avoid it at all costs to keep, their audience, as high as possible in that regard. Their numbers, ticket sales is up. And so, yeah, I'm very curious what prompted this question. Like, what makes you think that NC-17, what leads you to believe that there would be any type of comeback for that rating whatsoever? No, that is a scarlet letter rating that nobody wants, as far as I've seen in that regard. So I'm curious where that question comes from. But your fourth point here, you said, I've been better at blocking people. I treat them as ad pop ups. I trust blocking like an antivirus software. So far, so good. Yep, that's a great way to put it. Antivirus software, right? And I go back to what James Gunn said about not wanting to, give them weight, not wanting to give them reach, just let them scream into the void. Just ignore them. Just don't give the ridiculousness, whatever it is that they're saying, any further life than that original post. Just let it die out in that regard. And I completely 100% agree with that. I'm paraphrasing what he said in that regard, but either way, there is one other email that John sent that he said was optional, but I'll go ahead and bring it up here. He asked, "Are you familiar with Grok? It's primarily used on X, but hopefully it shows up on other social media platforms. It's basically ChatGPT, but responds to people on the app. Like, a few people claim Superman's a flop, but when Grok was used, they debunked it." No, I'm not an AI person. I'm not really big on AI whatsoever, and that includes ChatGPT. I am not pro AI in that regard. And, I try not to. I know that there are people who try to use Grok and ChatGPT responsibly, and that's great. But I know a lot of people that rely on it far too heavily. And I just dealt with somebody like it. But a couple of weeks ago, somebody was posting box office numbers that they got from ChatGPT, and they were wrong. They were horrifically wrong in that regard. And I'm like, is this what we're using? Instead of doing our own research, instead of actually, like I did a thing earlier today, John, where I was trying to determine, because this box office narrative about superhero fatigue continues to persist, right? And so I wanted to see, okay, how much have the four comic book movies this year actually made, and like what is their average? And that's when I discovered that Captain America Brave New World, Thunderbolts, Superman, and Fantastic Four First Steps have grossed a combined $1.8 billion and counting, because Superman and Fantastic Four First Steps are still in theaters, right? And I didn't use projected gross, I used what their current numbers are at now. 1.8 billion rather, and counting for this year. That is an average of $452.6 million per film. And I posted that a little bit ago on Threads to say, yeah, so superhero fatigue is bullshit. Like, it does not exist, because you don't make that much money through four films and, do all of that. Like, and claim that people are tired of superhero films, right? No, there's no way. And what I was trying to do was I was trying to compare it to 2023, because 2023 is the year that we had 7 movies, right? 3 from the MCU, 4 from the DCEU, and everybody knows about all the bombs, right? Out of all 7 of those movies, the only one that didn't really bomb at all was Guardians Volume 3, and that still made like $20 million less than Guardians Volume 2 did. But I wanted to compare the gross of the 4 movies this year to the box office gross of the 7 movies that year. And the only reason that year made more money, $2.5 billion between 7 movies, is because of Guardians Volume 3. If you take Guardians Volume 3 out of the equation, then then 6 of those 7 movies, right, in 2023, we're talking Quantumania, The Marvels, Shazam 2, The Flash, Blue Beetle, and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, right? All 6 of those films made about what, 100 million, 100.5 million, almost 200 million less than the 4 films made this year. Then you add in Guardians Volume 3, and that pushes it up. But my point is that superhero fatigue is bullshit, right? Now, I bring all of this up to say that, John, I went and calculated these numbers myself. I went to Box Office Mojo, got all the numbers, made certain and cross-checked with Katesh Panda and the numbers.com to make certain that the Superman and Fantastic Four numbers were accurate. And then I calculated them myself using Google Sheets. And I put that data in myself. I did not ask ChatGPT, and if I was on X, I wouldn't ask Grok. I'm not going to rely on AI when I can do the legwork myself because I want to make certain that it's right. I want to make certain that it's the real numbers. I want to make certain that it's accurate. I'm not going to trust AI to do that. So that's where I sit with it. So no, I would never use Grok, even if it becomes available for other platforms. And I won't use ChatGPT. Like that's just not what I do, right? That's not how I operate, right? As I just displayed here. So I went and calculated numbers myself, and at most, the most automated I did was using the sum function and the equals function on Google Sheets to get me a total. That was it. But you know what? As far as information gathering, I mean, we have the ability to Google and research ourselves. We don't need to rely on AI to do everything for us. And dangerously, more and more people are relying on AI, and that's how disinformation and misinformation gets spread. Man, it's a slippery slope. Way too many people are irresponsible with it. So no, certainly not. I am not a fan whatsoever. But that's my thoughts on that. Those might be controversial as well, but either way, it's how I feel. But that is it for John's emails this week. Thank you for your 3 emails this week, John. It is indeed greatly appreciated. All right, this next email is from our Superman superfan, Waliyu Mustafa, but it's a different type of email. He calls it No Actual Update because he says, Hey Ray, I don't have an update from myself this week. I just want to say that it's perfectly fine for you to share my YouTube link with Amr and anyone else who might be interested so they can watch my Superman review. As you stated, he says, I have over 1,000 videos on the channel. If anyone wants to know the background on my YouTube stint, I started way back in 2007 when I used to record myself dancing and post them for all to see. Don't ask, lol. Then I moved on to doing reviews of Smallville, he says. That came about because I got excited about the prospect of Doomsday appearing in season 8, and it was the mid-season cliffhanger that prompted me to start talking about the show. After that, I started to do movie reviews, he says, and it just built up from there. Before I knew it, I was posting videos nonstop, and it wasn't just reviews, it was also movie trailers and clips from Smallville episodes. Eventually I had to stop because of copyright, as I had 2 channels prior banned because of it. Yep, that pesky old copyright indeed. He says I then moved on to comic book reviews and even took on the mammoth task of reviewing the DCCW when Arrow and The Flash started. But by the time more shows were added, I decided to take a break and step back. I would instead do reviews of the crossover episodes from the Arrowverse. I remember running competitions for things such as Man of Steel and The Dark Knight Rises. Man of Steel was the biggest one, as I did a lot of videos in the run up to the release of the movie itself, giving away prizes here and there for viewers. Okay, alright. I would say I got a bit of a cult following, he says, and even inspired some people to start doing videos. Their words, not mine. I never wanted to become popular or famous. I was just a guy in his bedroom talking about random geeky things. I guess it was nice to have an outlet for that. Anyway, here we are 17 years later, and while I don't post as much, it's nice to see that people still enjoy what I put out. And that'll do it, he says. Didn't think I would post all that, lol. Take care and enjoy your week. Thank you, Waliyu Mustafa. Well, Waliyu, thank you for sharing that, sharing some insight into your YouTube channel. And quite honestly, a lot of times I feel like those are great stories to hear, because you hear all the time about Mr. Beast and all these other big, huge YouTubers, and hey, you've got to do this for content creation, you got to do that for content creation. Here's how you're going to make money off of this. You got to appeal to this audience. You got to do that. You got to do this. You got to do that. And very few people talk about. You don't hear a lot of people talk about using YouTube and like social media as an outlet, content creation as an outlet just to share their own thoughts and feelings, their own opinions, right? Not everybody is in it to make money. Not everybody's in it to be famous, to get some type of notoriety. A lot of people are just doing it for the fun of it because it's something that they want to share with others, right? And they want that community. They want to share their passions with people who are as passionate as they are. And I feel like those are the best ones. Those are the ones that are truly like the best content creators, right? The ones who are not necessarily doing it for the business and don't, not corporate shilling or whatnot. They actually want to build the community. They actually want to share something that they are passionate about with others who are just as passionate as they are, in a positive sense in that regard. So I like that story, Wally. That's really awesome, to be honest with you. And I wish that there were more YouTube channels like yours that was born out of that, right? And regardless of how you wanted to build it up, that you got to a pretty sizable amount, right? You got more subscribers, you got more of a following, more content than I do in that regard, but you kept it centered around your passion. You kept it centered around what you enjoy and what you wanted to share with others. And like that to me is the most genuine part of, being a content creator and being, a YouTuber and whatnot. Like I wish there were more of those. I do than what we see these days, which is just shilling and hate marketing and just, trying to, say hateful things and do hateful shit just to attract an audience, right? To make money, just to grift people in that regard. We see way, way too much of that, unfortunately. And yeah, we need less of that, significantly less of that, none of that really, and more of the genuine stuff like what Wally does or what he has done with his particular channel. So thank you for sharing that, Wally. You appreciate that. I know you said you didn't really have an update for this week, but that was still cool. Still appreciate that because Amr last week did ask if he could share that with everybody else because I think he enjoyed the review and whatnot. So yeah, that is cool. Thank you for sharing that information with us, Wally. We appreciate that. You take care and you enjoy your week as well, good sir. All right, next up, our good buddy Phil Barker, who I talked to the other night. Actually, I've talked to him a few times the last couple of weeks, being back on Vodka Stream, and he did let me know on Friday that he sent this email, and I had brought up a particular talking point that he did mention in this email. This one is titled, "What are your superpowers again?" I'm rich, which of course is that's the Flash, Barry Allen, the Flash, talking to Bruce Wayne as they prepare to get into a swanky car and head back to Gotham, I guess, during the recruitment in Zack Snyder's Justice League. Yes, fantastic. Love that line. Love that movie, of course. Still the greatest shared cinematic universe movie, in my opinion, as far as the comic book movies are concerned. But the Gemini summary, which it did provide for Phil's email, says that Philip shared updates on his trip, comic books, and upcoming superhero movies. He also discussed his enjoyment of the Fantastic Four First Steps film and his progress in Final Fantasy X. The Fantastic Four First Step stuff is what I'm really looking forward to. Phil and I have not really talked about that yet, but here, let's get into his email. He says, "Hey Ray, happy to be home. Southern California was a fun time. Visited some friends, our friend Dave, of course. This was the first time I decided to do something long form like this for myself, and I had a great time traveling on my own accord. California is home to some really beautiful scenery, and I'm glad I took the time to do this for myself." That's good. That's awesome. We all need, like, decompression. We all need to relax. We all need to absolutely take some time for ourselves, especially if it involves taking a break from social media, because we all doom scroll on that probably a little more than we should. Maybe a lot more than we should. He says, "I'd mentioned I'd seen our friend Dave the Film Junkie, yes, of course, who does the Film Junkie channel on YouTube and has the vodka stream every Friday that Phil has been on many times. I've been on many times as well, and I've been back on it lately." He says, "And we talked about all manner of things films, critique, film discourse, amongst other things. We went to a comic book store, and I ended up purchasing the novel Batman Beyond the White Knight, which is the third part in the White Knight storyline from Sean Murphy. It blends elements from the animated series and beyond with other various incarnations while telling its own story about how the Joker turned Gotham City against Batman successfully. It's a great story, one of the better Elseworld tales I could recommend, to be honest. Outside of this, the only other book I'm reading monthly is Absolute Batman by Scott Snyder, and man, this book is just awesome. In every sense of the word, Snyder is cooking with gas with this book, and Absolute Bane is horrifying and makes primetime Bane seem tame by comparison. All this just reminds me that I really need to get off my ass about my comic reading, especially since I re-upped my DC Universe Infinite subscription, and yeah, I really need to get on that. I really do, because they, as Jared Cardos was saying, like they have added a monthly like component where you can actually get the ultra subscription to get everything, including the current stuff, at a monthly price. I wanted them to do that years ago and they didn't, but now they finally have, and it's like, okay, so I should have an opportunity to read Absolute Batman, if I'm not mistaken. I think I have that right. I'll have to go and double check that. But I mean that and so many other stories that I absolutely just need to get off my ass, buckle down, and read. Truthfully, seriously, it's been way too long since I've read comics with any type of like consistency. I don't know that I've ever read them. I think the last time I read them really with consistency was back in 9 years ago in 2016 when I was like collecting all of DC Rebirth, and that got unwieldy real quick. I mean, man, did that get unwieldy real quick. You know what? It's funny because like I could probably afford that habit a lot better now, right? Like not the job I was working then, but the job that I'm working now. And essentially that is just extended to my steelbook collection, my steelbook library, and all of my movies in that regard. But yeah, that's the last time that I really like read comics with any like consistency and regularity. I need to find a way to do that, especially now that digital is available. Digital is a thing because DC Universe Infinite was not a thing 9 years ago. But either way, Phil says, "Speaking of Batman, Part 2 films in the spring. About damn time, he says. And LOL, Robin. I'll leave it at that. Yeah, okay. Briefly, he's leaving that at that. I will bring it up briefly. One of our most uh, infamous scoopers, if you will. I think Phil calls him a rat. Or the rat. I forget which. I think he's the rat. Jeff Snyder. I call him Chattanooga FBI because of the one time that he threatened to call his buddies in the Chattanooga FBI if he got any more like vicious threats. And not that anybody should be sending him or anybody else death threats. That's absolutely unacceptable. It's still, that's just it, with all the nonsense and bullshit that guy has spewed over the years. It's just that will always stick in my mind with respect to that. But he reported, and like Reddit and so many other people picked this up, the regurgitators, that Robin was in the script for the Batman Part 2. And that really went rampant for a couple of days until James Gunn body slammed it day before yesterday. I mean, absolutely tore a new one. Bam, not the case. And yeah, really appreciate that he did that. But, all me and Phil had to do was look at the source and see who said it and know that it was bullshit and that it was never going to happen. And we said that before James Gunn body slammed it. But, it's always great for the actual boss of DC Studios, who is the only person we should be listening to with respect to any confirmation and green lighting of anything in DC Studios. It was great for him to, validate what we already knew in that regard. So, yeah, I had to bring that up for sure. Thank you. Phil says, in all seriousness, I had a feeling Batman Part 2 would be the next movie to go into production after Clayface. As a Batman fan, I'm fine with that. Now, the excitement stems from who will join the fun for the second part, both in character and actor/actress. The ramp up to any Batman film will always have that bedazzled aura to it, but I welcome it nonetheless every single time. Looking forward to how much bigger the world of the Batman is about to get. Same with Spider-Man, he says. Brand New Day has begun filming, and the new suit looks great. Can't wait to see what that movie develops into and where the MCU goes leading into Doomsday and Secret Wars. All right, so the Batman Part 2 is intriguing because I do wonder exactly how much further they're going to develop that like whole like the Batman epic crime saga. I'm curious about that. That's the biggest question because I will go ahead and continue to reiterate that I don't think the general audience cares if we have two Batman running at the same time. I don't. And I still don't believe that we're going to see a case where Pattinson and Reeves cross over what they're doing and, throw away their creative freedom just to cross over into what James Gunn is doing with the DCU. I know there are plenty of fans that still want to hold out that hope and, again, toss away creative freedom, right? So that just tells you how many fans really don't care about creative freedom. All the people that want the Batman to get folded into the DCU, you are ditching creative freedom for James Gunn. And that's the creative freedom that you wanted for Zack Snyder that you are now tossing aside for, James Gunn, like tossing aside Matt Reeves, right? All that aside, like I do wonder how much they are going to fill out that world. And listen, if they decide to make the Batman Epic Crime Saga the Elseworlds thing that happens concurrently with the DCU, great, fantastic. I have no issue with that. And I feel like if there was any character that you could do that with successfully and not have to worry so much about it, it would be Batman, most certainly, because Batman, like Spider-Man, does not fail. He doesn't. Closest we can come to failure for Batman is Batman and Robin, right? And I know a lot of people are like, it did so much damage, they strayed away from it for 8 years. My tone on that has kind of changed in the last number of years, to be honest with you, because I've seen how Warner Brothers treated Superman, and I don't think that was acceptable at all. So the idea that they stayed away from Batman for 8 years because of Batman and Robin, is it more because of the damage that movie did to the brand, or is it more because of Warner Brothers' incompetence? I really am tending to lead more towards Warner Brothers' incompetence. Now, it worked out for them because Christopher Nolan resurrected Batman in 2005 expertly and gave us the Dark Knight trilogy, which is phenomenal, right? I'm not arguing or complaining about that whatsoever. I'm just saying, like, as far as Batman's success at the box office, he does not fail, right? He generally hits, even if people don't necessarily dig all of the time that he hits. And yeah, that actually includes Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. I've seen some people talk about how that's still a Superman movie. Well, then by that same token, it's also still a Batman movie. And they didn't miss either. They didn't fail in that regard. So if you were going to keep a separate Elseworlds like plot line alongside the DCU, Batman would be the one that you could do it with. No question. I do think that is the case in that regard. So we'll see. I'm very curious to know like how much further they want to go with that, in addition to the DCU plan for that Batman that will exist in the same universe as David Cornsweet's Superman and whoever is cast as Wonder Woman and everybody else and whatnot. So we will see. Of course, I'll take all of it. I'm a Batman fan. I'm not going to complain if they decide to do that going forward. But I do wonder if they will continue on with that for a longer term. We will see. We will find out. As far as Spider-Man, I mean, look, that costume, Brandon, and there hasn't been a bad Spider-Man costume. There has not. I have preferences. If I had to pick a preference, I would say probably Andrew Garfield's. From I know that they were talking on Vodka Stream the other night about the bigger eyes that he had, the bigger eyes that the mask had in Amazing Spider-Man 2. I probably still gravitate more towards the Amazing 1 costume, to be honest with you, as far as like my personal favorite, but I don't dislike any of them. Toby's costume is great. And the Stark spider, the mechanical spider in Homecoming and I think Civil War, yeah, it's the modernized, right? It's the MCU version, right? It doesn't bother me, right? I don't I'm not that much of a nitpicker, like there are certain like costumes, like for example, Captain America's costume. I can tell you right off the bat that the Avengers Captain America costume I never need to see again, like ever, right? Like the costume in First Avenger, my favorite of his, which is the blue and gray that he had in the first part of Winter Soldier. Even the other costume that he had, with the full colors in the same design, the Nomad costume that he had at the beginning of Infinity War, all other Captain America costumes have been better than that one. That's a weak link. The one in the Avengers, the first Avengers film. That is a weak link as far as Captain America costumes are concerned, in my opinion. So I can point to that. I can tell you that I probably enjoy the older Iron Man costumes more than the newer ones, especially when Stark started getting nanotech and it just looked too glossy and too smooth to me. Right? That was a welcome, that was a refreshing change of pace. In Ironheart, when they went back to like the old school way of animating the Iron Man suits, right? And obviously it's not Stark, it's Riri Williams, but they went back to the old principles instead of it just being nanotech, right? Which that was just the thing, right? Nanotech this, nanotech that, or whatever. So yeah, there are preferences obviously, but with Spider-Man, they have hit on every Spider-Man costume in live action, in my opinion. And yeah, this one looks really good, and yeah, I'm very intrigued to see what the plot lines are. I've avoided a lot of the inside baseball, but like Destin Daniel Cretton directing, he did such a phenomenal job with Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and seeing all the practical stunts and whatnot that they're filming, the practical web slinging and all that, and the jumping and all that. Just yeah, I like the direction so far that this appears to be going in production wise. So I'm looking forward to it as well. But Spider-Man, of course, my favorite of the Marvel superheroes, right? Like Batman and Spider-Man are my two favorites. Yes, the god tier of popularity as far as superheroes with both labels are my favorites. They most certainly are. Batman and Spider-Man. I would say outside of that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in Marvel general, the X-Men, obviously, that's my favorite group. It's difficult for me to pick a favorite X-Men, but that's my favorite grouping that I'm looking at, more than Avengers, more than Fantastic Four in that regard, right? But yeah, either way, be very intriguing to see where the MCU goes leading into Doomsday and Secret Wars, and we are about a year away or so from finding out all of that. But here we go. He says, all right, Phil says, Fantastic Four First Steps was fantastic. Ah, yes, pun intended. It was hands down my favorite superhero film of 2025, and I saw it twice in the same weekend, he says. Worth the price of admission alone for witnessing the birth of Franklin Richards while navigating a black hole as a slingshot. Everything with the Silver Surfer was superb and looked incredible. Julia Garner turned in an excellent performance as Shalaval. Ralph Ineson was haunting as Galactus. This was literally what I wanted from a Fantastic Four film, a period piece set in the 1960s. The fact that it's got some Jetsons and I Love Lucy inspiration is a bonus. Could it be doing better at the box office? I wish, he says. However, it is now the highest grossing Fantastic Four film to date and will surely grow into some legs over time. I've got some data on that to update for that, Phil, here shortly. Either way, he says, I will find a way to get this in physical form. The last film, I don't care what kind of steelbook there is, I just want to own the film. I'm pretty picky about what I own physically, and this one is getting added to the collection. I truly loved this movie and everything it brought with it, between family, community, spectacle, and heart. The second view really solidified how much I enjoyed this film and made my top 5 of the MCU. Yeah, and so a few things on that. First of all, I don't know why Disney is, dragging ass with respect to the Steelbook pre-orders because I remember them doing this something similar in 2023. The last time they released three movies in one year, 2023. I think the pre-orders for Quantum Mania and Guardians Volume 3, like those popped up pretty fast. And then they drug their feet, and I wasn't certain if they were going to release one for the Marvels. I'm like, wait a minute, where is that? And granted, that was like a November release, but still, it took like a couple of months, right? Whereas this year, kind of the same thing. The Brave New World pre-orders, I think, were available like a week after that movie released. Same with Thunderbolts, right? And I got both of those. I'm still waiting for a pre-order link for Fantastic Four First Steps. Where the hell is it? And what is the deal with that? Like, and I don't know what entails with respect to that, but they need to get on that because yes, I will own that most certainly. And they've done all 36 MCU films have been released in multiple steelbook forms. Why wouldn't you release the 37th in that 4K steelbook form? When it happens, I will pre-order it post haste. It will become part of the collection, no doubt about it. Like I'm picky as well, but by the same token, I have a wide strike zone with respect to my physical media library and just what I watch in general. So yeah, waiting on that, Disney. Get going. Let's get those pre-orders going. I mean that color scheme and those logos. I know what it should look like. As far as like the steelbook art, it'd be great if they gave it a matte finish. Oh, I so wish they would get. They're probably not. They're probably gonna give it a glossy finish because I think all the other ones mostly have glossy finishes. But a matte finish for that Fantastic Four with the '60s vibe would be absolute chef's kiss. But either way, yeah, can't wait for that. With respect to the box office, here's some updated numbers for you. And I posted this earlier on Threads as well. So, Phil, I don't know if you were on Threads earlier and you saw my post because I'm all about dispelling and debunking bullshit narratives, right? So, this idea that Fantastic Four is just this massive bomb and that it's proof of superhero fatigue, bullshit. That's lazy, easy button stuff. But here we go. Fantastic Four has now crossed 400 million worldwide at the box office. In fact, it's sitting at 230.4 million domestic as of the time we're recording this, 203.8 million international, and 434.2 million worldwide. So yeah, not only is that the highest grossing Fantastic Four film to date, and I mean with a bullet, this movie has made nearly $100 million more than the first Fantastic Four film did. In fact, I think it's over that because I think that was 333. This is 434, right? And it is, according to Gatesh Panda, it's heading to around 525 million. And me personally, I don't know about you, but once a film reaches $500 million, like how do you call that a flop? Like seriously, how do you call it a flop? You can say underperformed, but here's the thing: your underperforming statement would be a guess based on the studio because only the studio knows what they consider to be performing and underperforming, and whether they disclose that to you or not is their business, right? I don't care what insiders say. I don't care what anybody at Forbes tries to tell you. I don't care what anybody at The Wrap or any Scoop of Madness or any other rags try to tell you. Collider, Screen Rant, anybody else that tries to posit a bunch of negative bullshit. I don't care what they say. $500 million is not a flop to me in that regard, right? Regardless of budgets. So Gatesh is saying worldwide final heading to around 525 million, which for a Fantastic Four film is quite good, to be honest with you. But on top of that, it now also solidifies because I saw some people questioning this as well. They were like, hopefully it will make more than Brave New World and Thunderbolts. Well, it has. It most certainly has. It has eclipsed both of them. Brave New World was at 415, if I'm not mistaken. 415.1 million. Thunderbolts was at 382.4 million. Fantastic Four is ahead of them already and still has some weeks to remain in theaters. Like Gatesh says, he thinks it'll get to 525. Superman and Fantastic Four have more weeks to go with respect to their box office. So if you were a Fantastic Four fan, you have much reason to celebrate, with respect to this being the best Fantastic Four film, subjectively speaking, in terms of the film quality and even data points with respect to popularity and the box office. Yes, it's all there without question. It's an outstanding film. It is certainly one of the MCU's best. I have it sixth in my ranking, my MCU ranking, and I had mentioned before that my perspective on that has changed. I don't know if I mentioned it here. I think I did on the last flight chat, but my perspective on that has changed because I initially on the first viewing I had Thunderbolts ahead of it just by a spot, but after that second viewing, I will put Fantastic Four just ahead of Thunderbolts. So that's sixth on my list of the MCU in the top tier, just behind Black Panther at 5, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings at 4, Infinity War at 3, Iron Man at 2, and Captain America the Winter Soldier is still my number 1 as far as the MCU is concerned. And Thunderbolts is sitting at 7th because I still really, really like Thunderbolts. Okay, so yeah, I have nothing but effusive praise to give this film. I'm with you in terms of Ralph Ineson and Galactus. I love what Julia Garner did with Shia LaBeouf. However, I don't know what their plans are with respect to the Fantastic Four going forward. I know that Feige has gone on record as saying the X-Men are going to feature heavily in the next part of the MCU as they try to navigate this reset, if you will, after Secret Wars. But yeah, I would love to see her return as Shia LaBeouf, right? And we'll see what goes on with respect to that and the whole Galactus storyline. But yeah, no, it was just really, really good. I thoroughly enjoyed it, to be honest with you. And might end up seeing it a third time because I think I'd mentioned before Shonda hasn't seen it yet, so we may end up going to see it because she's been busy, her work schedule and whatnot, not quite the same as mine to be able to go out and see these films in that regard. Plus, she doesn't podcast about it on a regular basis, so different priorities. It's understandable, but she does want to see it. All right, continuing with the rest of Phil's email, he says Alex De Silva wished me luck on the Chocobo racing in Final Fantasy X. I'll happily let him know that that was the first thing I did, and I've already gotten the Celestial Weapons completed for Titus, Ricky, Kamari, Yuna, and Auron. Waka is next, and Lulu is last. I don't like the lightning dodge, he says. I've only played for a grand total of 81 hours. Oh, is that all? And I've completed Titus's spear grid, and I'm now grinding for everyone else's grids, among other items that I am farming to stat max. I still need a few monsters from Inside Sin for the arena, but I'll get to them eventually. But yes, my Final Fantasy X run is going along very nicely. Thanks for wishing me luck. Anyways, that's about all I got for you this time around. Old chum, live long and prosper. Philip Barker. Phil, as always, thank you for the update. Thank you for the great words. Again, the Final Fantasy X stuff. Listen, I joke about the 81 hours, but no, I get it. I understand. I'm not a Final Fantasy person, but have I played games like RPGs and whatnot? At least like Mass Effect or even open world games for that many hours? Yep, I have. I get it. I absolutely get it. I completely understand the grind. Yes, sir. Maybe not to that extent, but I get it, and I salute you as well with respect to your quest and your ultimate goals and aims with respect to Final Fantasy X. I don't know how many people out there, other than Alex, yourself, and myself, and a few others, I think Anthony as well, are gamers, but still, we all get it. I think we all understand for sure. So, yes, best of luck to you on all of that, good sir. And thank you, as always, for the kind words. Looking forward to more of your emails. And again, of course, chatting with you again whenever possible on the Vodka Stream over at our good buddy Dave's Film Junkie channel. Next up, we've got some Blue Sky feedback that I actually wanted to bring up from Mr. Sam Otten because he was responding to his email that he sent in last week with respect to Zack Snyder's Justice League and the Zack Snyder DC movies, because I had talked about how he had named them as the Dawn of Justice trilogy, but I hadn't heard that name before. And so Sam sent some clarification on Blue Sky. He said, to clarify, Dawn of Justice trilogy is not the official name, but it should have been. During the period before WB had decided, our Justice League Universe podcast team pushed for Dawn of Justice trilogy because it all leads to establishing the League. Dawn equals sun equals Superman. Dawn of Justice is the subtitle of BVS. Justice, Justice League. He said Zack Snyder trilogy seems to exclude the possibility of him doing another trilogy in another franchise. Zack Snyder DC trilogy is clunky and disrespects the other creatives. Justice League trilogy is weird because the League is only in the third film, and the real JL trilogy would have been Snyder's JL1, JL2, JL3. So I hear you, and that's Dawn of Justice trilogy. Like, sounds awesome. I don't know if I will adapt that name myself because I'm kind of used to calling it the Zack Snyder trilogy, and they've already officially named it that. Like, it's officially, like, you can buy that. You can buy all three of those movies in a box set called the Zack Snyder trilogy, right? And I hear what you're saying in terms of it precluding the idea, or excluding it rather, of him doing a trilogy in another franchise. I don't think he's going to. I think the likelihood of him doing a trilogy in another franchise is not likely. Well, what if he does the third Rebel Moon movie? Okay, and you call that the Rebel Moon trilogy, perhaps, but that would be called the Rebel Moon trilogy, right? The Zack Snyder trilogy, to me, like, I get it as far as like we wouldn't call it the DC trilogy. I mean, and yeah, to disrespect the other creatives, I mean, not necessarily, because it's all his movies, right? It's not like we're adding Suicide Squad or Wonder Woman into that, right? So, yeah, I don't really see that as being clunky. It is what it is, but I think like as far as Zack Snyder trilogy, like it's really a name meant for those that understand the inside baseball of what happened and why we would call it his trilogy, right? With respect to a very just horrifically mismanaged time in DC films and in Warner Brothers in general, right? Just everything that happened and what was centered around it and how it all evolved and what it came out to be. Like, I think that's where that moniker comes from. But I don't have an issue whatsoever with it being called the Dawn of Justice trilogy. I mean, that can work. I mean, it is a name that certainly works to describe that trilogy. I guess I would accept any of these names. Truthfully, I don't really have. I mean, except for maybe Justice League trilogy, only because it's not really a Justice League trilogy. Like, that's the one where I agree that the League is only in the third film. The real JL trilogy would have been his three Justice League movies, and who knows, something like that could happen later, right? Like, that's our hope, or like that something like that would occur in the DCU. So obviously it would have nothing to do with Zack Snyder, potentially, maybe, I don't know, but either way, yeah, I think I'm fine with any of these names except for the Justice League trilogy, truthfully. But thank you for the breakdown and thank you for the explanation of where you got Dawn of Justice trilogy from. That's intriguing that that was a name that your podcast team had thought of in that regard. And yeah, no, marketing wise, it totally would have worked. It absolutely would have worked. With respect to connecting all three of those films, and would have it does fit what actually happens as far as it being the dawn of the Justice League. Yes, absolutely. And you know what? Had DC Studios existed back then, it probably would have been called the Dawn of Justice trilogy. But also, things would have happened differently, much differently than what they ended up happening in that regard. DC Studios was sadly 9 years too late. Maybe even longer than that. But hey, it is what it is. It's all in the past. And that's where we're at with it. But thank you, Sam, for sending that clarification in on Blue Sky. And finally, we're going to close out this flight chat with an email from Alex De Silva. Speaking of Alex De Silva, this one is titled Flight Chat 14 Interstellar Racquetball. Intriguing. The AI summary, the Gemini summary of his email says Alex suggested limiting emails per flight chat cycle to reduce episode length and discuss the Gina Carano lawsuit. Oh, okay. Talk about a potentially controversial subject there. He says Alex questioned the purpose of staying for end credits and shared Fantastic Four spoilers about Ben Grimm. Okay, so we're continuing our discussion on end credits. He also provided tidbits from Eyes of Wakanda, discussed the DCU's continuity, and shared Peacemaker podcast details, and also shared thoughts on a Star Trek episode, including watching the intro and a stabbing scene. Okay, let's see how accurate that is. This email sounds like it's longer than what Alex normally sends. It really isn't. This is about the length of some of his more, typical emails, if you will. But he starts off and says, Hey, Ray, dang, that last flight chat was longer than the Return of the King Extended Edition. Yes, it was. It was fun to listen to, he says, but if you're looking to cut down the length of those episodes, maybe you could limit everyone to just one email per flight chat cycle. I definitely contributed to the 5+ hours since I sent more than one email. I don't know, just a suggestion. I wouldn't want flight chat to become unsustainable for you. Well, I appreciate the suggestion. It isn't just about number of emails. I know that like John sent a ton, but also length of email, like I said, like Dorsey emails or like Amer's emails, right? Like those tend to be, and sometimes like the other emails can tend to be as long as well. So really, it comes down to that. And I'm not, I don't want to limit what any of you guys have to say. I think the overflow episode will definitely be the way to go. Like there's going to be a threshold with respect to how long an episode is going to be. And if it goes over, then we'll just have to move emails to a second episode, which will either be the next day or maybe a couple of days later, maybe on one of the other off days, like either a Wednesday or, a Friday, something to that effect, right? Before we get to the next flight chat cycle, if you will. So it might end up being multiple deadlines. I don't know. I'll have to organize that myself, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So continuing, Alex says, so apparently Disney settled the lawsuit with Gina Carano recently. Lucasfilm put out a statement saying something along the lines of looking forward to seeing what opportunities they'll have to work together in the future. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that one. It's tough to imagine Disney wanting to hire her again after everything that happened. So I've only heard about this in passing. As I dig further into this about the Gina Carano lawsuit, there was a story on it 3 days ago from the Hollywood Reporter written by Winston Cho where it says, yes, she accused the studios of discrimination and wrongful termination over her firing from The Mandalorian. And in a statement, a Lucasfilm spokesperson said, with this lawsuit concluded, we look forward to identifying opportunities to work together with Ms. Carano in the near future. We've reached an agreement with Gina Carano to resolve the issues in her pending lawsuit against the companies, it added. Ms. Carano was always well respected by her directors, co-stars, and staff, and she worked hard to perfect her craft while treating her colleagues with kindness and respect. Carano said in a statement that the deal is the best outcome for all parties involved and my desires remain in the arts. Terms of the settlement, which was announced on Thursday, were not disclosed, but it said that in a lawsuit filed last year, she alleged that she was fired for voicing right wing opinions on social media and sought a court order that would force Lucasfilm to recast her. Elon Musk, making good on a promise to foot the legal bill for users who claim they've been discriminated against due to their activity on his platform, helped fund the suit through X. And she said, you know what, this part I did see, where she said, quote, I want to extend my deepest, most heartfelt gratitude to Elon Musk, a man I've never met, who did this good Samaritan deed for me. The legal action came after Lucasfilm announced in 2021 that she would not return to the hit series after sharing a post in which she said, most people today don't realize that to get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, the government first made their own neighbors hate them simply for being Jews. How is that any different from hating someone for their political views? The latest in a long string of posts in which the former MMA fighter drew the ire of social media users for positions seen as right wing on hot button issues. Yeah, one of them being anti vax. But at any rate, uh, to be very honest with you, Alex, I tend to agree with you. I don't think that they're going to be like racing to rehire her for anything. They're certainly not going to bring her back in the original character that she was. In The Mandalorian, they don't need to at this point. Like, they're not just going to retroactively put her in The Mandalorian and Grogu. I mean, I suppose they could, but I doubt it. I think, truthfully, Alex, that this is more of a politically based settling, if you will, that has to do with the current regime in the White House. I most certainly believe that. We've seen a lot of these studios and a lot of these companies make decisions based on business posturing with the White House. And whether we agree with it or not, they are acting in what they believe is the best interest of their companies, the best interest of the one percenters that are in charge of these companies to be able to conduct further business without like trouble in that regard, right? And there's even a thing like I saw this the New York Times, which is just basically Fox News in print form at this point. The New York Times posted this story about how Hollywood was horny and white again, and that was a really shitty and like lightly racist headline, but it was basically an article written by the CEO of the Rap that suggested that Hollywood, after basically being woke for the last however many years, was now finally shying away from that and diverting away from that. And to that, I say, are you certain that that's the case, or are you just hurrying to do that because you're trying to curry favor with an audience that you believe is like driving the majority of business based on how the presidential election went? I think it's the latter. And I don't think that that many people are quite as racist and as bigoted as they're leaning toward, right, with all this anti-DI and stuff and policies and whatnot. But we know that Disney is one of those companies that has enacted anti-DEI stances, right? And so it seems like they wanted to end a lawsuit against somebody that was in favor of the policies that the current White House is espousing, because the last thing they wanted was for the lawsuit to continue and then for the president, to actually say some shit, which he would, on Truth Social or on social media. So they're doing it to deflect attention. Whether they intend to rehire her or not, like, the thing is, they could just as easily say, well, we haven't found a role for her at this time, right? They could do that, and not necessarily put her back in Star Wars, right? It doesn't have to be, like they don't have to, put her back. They just settled the suit in order to get the public, like the spotlight off of them for that. A spotlight that could have been turned up in intensity again. All it takes is one stupid ass, social media post from the current president in order to turn up the heat on that. And they don't want that from a business standpoint, whether they agree with his stance or not. And, I'm sure many of them do agree with his stance, but, whether they agree with it or not, they were looking at it in terms of business. So yeah, I think they settled for those reasons because of that particular pressure, almost as though they feel bullied into it, or at least we look at it that way, like they were bullied into it, but they feel like in the interest of business, not to do it, not to cause attention to themselves. But as far as her being rehired, yeah, I doubt that too, Alex. We'll see exactly how that goes going forward. But right now, they're in no hurry. They don't need to in that regard, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Alex says, we talked a little about end credits last time around. This might sound extremely snarky, but I swear I'm asking this from a place of good faith. How exactly is staying for the end credits showing respect to the people who worked on the movie? That would make sense if they were all sitting in the auditorium with you, but they'll never know one way or another whether the audience sat and caught their names in the credits. Well, to that end, Alex, I could ask this question. What is the point of me doing this show? And you might think that that's reductio ad absurdum, but here's the deal: my show doesn't have a massive audience. My show isn't heard by a ton of people. But the reality of the situation is, I don't know who's listening to my show. I don't know who is watching my TikTok, right? I don't know. I can look at that and say, well, my numbers are only doing this, and I only have this many followers, right? But all it takes is a couple of people to see a name, or to read or to hear a show and have that make an impact on them in that regard, right? What if, somebody that goes to see Superman or Fantastic Four knows somebody or has a friend who went to school with somebody that, is a visual effects artist, right? And what if they do the same thing that I told you that one woman did, the extra who was in the car when, Superman was saving her from the building crashing down on the overpass, right? Where she literally walked up to the screen and took a picture, pointed out where her name was in the credits, right? Like that's a point of pride in that regard. And look, I'm not saying everybody. Look, I advised you, Alex, not to sit for credits. It doesn't sound like you're somebody that cares. You don't give a shit. It is what it is. You don't care in that regard. Not everybody cares. Somebody does though, right? Someone does in that regard. And I guess the biggest issue that I took with what you said last week was you felt like your time was being disrespected. Well, nobody forced you to sit there for that. And that's where the MCU indoctrination and grooming comes into play, because you were expecting the end credit and the mid credit scene to lead to something that it didn't have to. They're not required to do that. And if you feel disrespected for that, that's your own fault, as far as I'm concerned, because they can do whatever they want with end credit scenes. So, I flat out said, I am recommending to you and your wife, don't sit for end credit scenes. You don't care. That is not your thing in that regard. You don't need it, right? So, that'd be one of those cases where you might want to risk spoilers and find out from somebody that saw it before you, okay, do the end credit scenes point to anything or not? I think you can go ahead and assume, based on what James Gunn has said, that DCU end credit scenes are not going to do that. But as far as MCU credit scenes, you may still want to check. But yeah, I feel like there are people, and I mean, 340 million people plus in this country alone, and then, billions others across the world. I mean, all it takes, Alex, is for one person to see, that maybe they didn't know, hypothetically speaking, and maybe this isn't so hypothetical because perhaps there's somebody out there that can attest to this. But all it takes is somebody that has a dream of doing something in a particular, like visual effects category or something for a movie, to see that title actually listed in the credits and go, oh wait, they do this? Who is that? Right? And then find out who that name is, and then do the Google, do the research. Don't ask ChatGPT or Grok. Do the research, and then now that opens up a whole new world of possibilities for them. Just because they decided to sit and watch the end credits. So it's not a case where, like you're looking at it from a place of like showing respect, like that the people are aware of. That's not what it's about. That's not what it's about at all. It's about like placing that respect, whether it is reciprocal or not. And respect isn't like in like innately reciprocal in that regard. Like you don't have to do it just because somebody's there. You don't have to give a round of applause. It's just like when people give a round of applause at the end of a movie, and I hear people disparage that all the time. Like, who are you clapping for? They can't hear you. It don't matter. That's not the point. The point is, it's people showing their appreciation in their own way. And there's nothing wrong with that as far as I'm concerned, right? Positivity is better than negativity in that regard, right? So what may annoy you, what may be seen to you as a waste of time, is not so much in the psyche of other people. So that's what I would say with respect to sitting and waiting for the credits. It does not matter if anybody for the credits, if everybody that worked on Fantastic Four or Superman knows that I read the credits or knows that anybody else read the credits. What matters is how reading those credits impacts the person that did so. That's what matters in that regard. So it's not always reciprocal, is what I would say with respect to that. I hope that wasn't a terribly snarky answer to your sounding extremely snarky but not snarky question in that regard. I got what you were asking, and didn't think it was too snarky, but yeah, I just that's what I would say with respect to that. So continuing, he says some very, very quick Fantastic Four spoilers. One thing I noticed in the movie that not is that everyone on Earth 828 seems to love Ben Grimm. In fact, unless I'm mistaken, not once is he referred to as the Thing. Everyone just calls him Ben Grimm. My prediction is that when the Fantastic Four end up on Earth 616, the people there are going to react much differently to Mr. Grimm, and that's where the Thing moniker will finally surface. That would be ironic if the MCU is less tolerant of Ben Grimm than like Earth 828 is. It makes sense though. It does. It absolutely makes sense because 616 comes from a more cynical Earth than 828 does, very clearly. So, yeah, I could see that. I could absolutely see that. And I don't think that's necessarily going to depress him, but I just think he may want to get back to 828 faster, and I wouldn't blame him for that in that regard because that Earth seemed a lot happier and a lot more unified than any Earth that any of us have ever lived on. Just saying. So Alex then says, I watched Eyes of Wakanda. It's a fun concept wherein each episode covers a different time period and involves a Wakandan agent retrieving vibranium from the outside world. The show had some neat surprises throughout its 4 episode run. I feel like part of that description was spoilery. I didn't even know that that was the premise. I have not watched it yet. I would like to. I may watch it tomorrow, to be honest with you. But all right, fair enough. But I have not heard bad about it. I've heard some positive things. I've heard nothing but positive about it from those that have watched it in that regard. And yeah, I will watch it soon because yeah, it's only 4 episodes, and yeah, I should check that out pretty soon. He says for now the DCU is being touted as being a homeworkless universe, but that can only last for so long. It's different from Star Wars because in Star Wars it's just a bunch of different stories that take place in the same galaxy. But in the DCU, it's a bunch of stories that take place in the same world and are also building up to a big Justice League type event. It'll be impossible, he says, to just go into the DCU event movies without having done some homework, except for those members of the general audience who truly don't care at all about canon and continuity, but in my experience, people want to know at least a little bit about the universe before diving into a big team up story. I disagree with you, Alex, and here's why. Number one, is it impossible to do that? Is it impossible to read a Justice League book without reading the Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman books like beforehand? Is it impossible? Because is this not what comics do, right? With respect to they all have their solo runs, and then when an event happens, they all end up in an event. Now, I read one of the comic novels, one of the graphic novels that I grew up on. One of my favorite graphic novel stories at all. It was not a graphic novel to begin with, right? It was originally released as a 4 issue story, Cosmic Odyssey, right? By Jim Starlin and Mike Mignola. Okay, it's one of my favorite stories. It is my introduction to Fourth World, right? The basis of my Fourth World knowledge with respect to Highfather and Darkseid and New Genesis and Apocalypse comes from that book. I read that book when I was like 10, 11 years old, right? When I first started getting into Batman as being my favorite superhero. And my family, I've told this story before, I told it on Chris Belga's World's Finest True Believers show. Love Chris Belga. I talked to him the other night. Again, also been talking to him on Vodka Stream. But I talked about how my family bought me that graphic novel, right? All 4 of those issues in sold in graphic novel form. They bought me that because Batman and Superman were on the cover. They didn't know anybody else. They didn't know Green Lantern. They didn't know Martian Manhunter. They didn't know Highfather, Darkseid, New Genesis Apocalypse. They didn't know any of that. And me, I didn't know any of them either, right? I'm a kid. I know Batman and I know Superman because at that point I've seen Batman the animated series, right? And I've seen, I think it was around that time. Might have been either before or around that time that they gave me the book. It was somewhere in the early 90s, right? But I know about Batman and I obviously know about Superman because we've got the first 3 Superman movies on VHS in my house. So I have a genesis of those characters, right? And of course the animated series and like Lois and Clark and all that stuff are available. It's not like I don't know who those characters are, but I have no idea who Darkseid is, who Highfather is. I don't know who any of the other heroes are. John Stewart, Green Lantern, no clue. None whatsoever. Just I saw a black dude in a green suit with a mask on. Okay. John Jones, the Martian Manhunter. Didn't know who he was, right? I don't know who Light Ray is. I don't know who Starfire is. I don't know who Orion is. I don't know anybody else in that damn book. I don't know Dr. Fate. I know no one else. And yet somehow, Alex, I was able to read through this book and absorb it and enjoy the story without feeling completely lost at all, right? And I'm not general audience. I was a young kid at the beginning of my comic knowledge, right? So I wasn't general audience in terms of my sensibilities as a nerd, and I'm certainly not general audience now, right? So that was my introduction to it. And I hadn't read any tie-ins. I hadn't read any Batman tie-ins. I hadn't read any Superman tie-ins. I'm told by fans of DC Comics, Scott and the others have told me that apparently the thing that happens with Xanthi and John Stewart Green Lantern in that book does come up later in future runs of John Stewart Green Lantern, right? So there are things that happened in this continuity, in this book, that continued on further. I've still never read that story. So, no, it's not impossible, Alex. Not in the case of a movie. It might be impossible for you because you have to have that continuity. You have to have that sense of completionism. But I really am taking James Gunn at his word that he's doing this in the Star Wars manner where it is a bunch of stories that happen in the same world. And then when the team up occurs, it's not such as like, oh, well, you had to have known this in order to understand. No, it's not like the Infinity Saga, right? The Infinity Saga, yeah, and like even with respect to Infinity War, right? Like there were so many characters and there were so many people involved. There was so much lead up with the Infinity Stones, right? And like there were references to prior things. It's like, wait a minute, where did this stone come from? Where did that stone come from? How do you know to go here? How do you know to go there? That's different. He's so far setting it up to not be that same way. So whether or not it gets unwieldy for him, that's the only thing that concerns me, is whether or not it gets unwieldy for him to keep everything like on its own island before bringing things together for a team up event of some kind, whatever that event is. But there is no guarantee that whatever the giant Justice League team up event is, whenever that occurs, there is no guarantee that we're going to have to have seen Superman. We're going to have to have seen Brave and the Bold. We're going to have to have seen this. We're all going to watch them anyway as fans. We are. We're going to watch them anyway, right? But then when the question comes like, well, what do you have to have seen in order to have watched the movie? He's still going to craft it as, no, we don't have to have seen this. And it's not impossible, Alex. It's not. It's not impossible at all. If I could read Cosmic Odyssey, if I could read big stories like that, without, here, I'm sure there were build-ups to Death of Superman, were there not? And I've read Death of Superman, right? And I read World Without a Superman before reading Death of Superman. How about that, right? I read the arc, the 9 issues where he's dead, before reading the 9 issues or so where he died, okay? And I still haven't read Return to Superman, right? I still haven't gone further to read that. So I don't buy that, Alex. I don't buy that at all, that it's going to be impossible to go into the event movies without having done some homework. It might be impossible for you. It might not be possible for you, subjectively speaking. It will be difficult for you. It will not be difficult for everyone. And I don't know that it will be difficult for the general. I know it won't be difficult for the general public. I know it won't, because they already don't do that for the MCU, right? It's really more about hype and marketing, right? And if the hype and marketing for the rest of the DCU is anywhere close to what it just was for Superman and what it continues to be as they continue to hype the rest of the DCU going forward with all these behind the scenes clips and interviews and podcasts and appearances and photos and whatnot, right? Like if it continues to be that, if this is what DC Studios is going to be, then they don't have anything to worry about as far as getting people to see it without asking 1,000 questions like some had. Here's the other thing, Alex. You got to understand also that with respect to the intimidation of the homework problem in the MCU, a big part of that isn't just the other movies, it's also how many of them there are. The fact that Marvel Studios has put out 37 movies in 17, a little under 17 and a half years, that is an insane pace. What is that average, right? Over the course of 17 and a half years, right? And I'm guesstimating generously 17. It's really like 17. But you know what? May would be 17. All right, we're going to say 17, right? 37 movies over the span of 17 years. That is an average of 2.17 movies per year, right? And we know that there have been years where they've done 3. There was one year where they did 4, right? That's a lot in 17 years. And that's where the general audience gets spooked. That's where they get scared. That's where they're like, oh, wait, there have been so many. How many is it going to take? That type of deal, right? And so if you treat it differently in terms of like not having to build this continuity, if you do it the Star Wars way, then there is potential for that to work, right? And I'm unwilling to say right off the bat that it's impossible. I'm unwilling to say that whatsoever. I am not going to go there with you on that. I think it will be impossible for you, and I think it will be impossible for others who really need that sense of completionism. I think for everybody else, we'll be fine. I don't think it's going to be a problem, personally. I just question whether it will get unwieldy for Gunn and Safran to navigate. That's what my bigger question is. But if they actually succeed in executing what the comics essentially do, in having solo books and then a team up here and there, right? Or you know what? Here we go. Remember how a couple years ago I read all 97 issues plus tie-ins for Civil War? Well, for people reading Civil War, they can just read the Civil War book and not have to read the tie-ins. I wanted to read the tie-ins, but did I need to read the 7 issues of the Spider-Man tie-in to know what he was doing? No, I didn't. Did I need to read the Fantastic Four tie-ins to know what they were doing? No, I didn't. Right? And the other applies with Flashpoint. I've never read the Flashpoint tie-ins, not once. I've read the Flashpoint story. I had that graphic novel. I've read the Flashpoint story. I have never read the tie-ins. It works both ways in that regard, right? Where I could, and it would help me with extra context, but I don't have to because it doesn't make the understanding the actual event story impossible. It's no different than the comics, Alex, as far as that's concerned. So, no, I don't believe that it is impossible to just go into it. Maybe for you, but not for everybody. And it won't be for me. I'll say that, to be honest with you. I can go ahead and speak for myself on that one. All right. So continuing, Alex says, here are some quick tidbits I learned from episodes 2 and 3 of the Peacemaker podcast. From episode 2, Gunn confirms season 2 will include a brand new opening dance number in the vein of season 1's iconic Do You Want to Taste It opening. Yes, and he named the song and the band. Who is that again? He announced this at Comic-Con. It's the song Oh Lord by Foxy Shazam, which Gunn said is like one of his favorite bands, right? And I've listened to the song because I'd never heard of it. I'd listened to the song and I watched the video. And what I'm most intrigued by is if he's going to have them do dance moves similar to what they do in the music video for the actual song Oh Lord. I don't know, but yeah, he did definitely confirm that it's going to be a different song and a different dance for season 2. And that makes sense. To obviously further differentiate it from the season 1, which is not 100% canon with respect to the DCU. He says, Gunn said he can't wait to have Battinson face off against Batmite. Don't worry, he was just joking. Yeah, but he did talk about, I forget what else he said about Batmite, but no, obviously he was joking with respect to that. From episode 3, he says, I had no idea about this one. Apparently, Vigilante was originally played by a completely different actor with a very different body type than the current guy, so they had to go back and reshoot literally every single Vigilante scene from the first 5 episodes. That must have been an expensive headache. I was curious about why the original actor left, but all Gunn gave us was creative differences. It depends on how expensive the shots were, right? I mean, as far as the visual effects stuff, it's not like Vigilante is a powered individual, and I forget how labor intensive he was of a character in those first 5 episodes. So yeah, I don't know. It might have been expensive, it might not have been, but clearly they were willing to do it, right? Based off of what he had done so far with Suicide Squad, and it seems to have paid off. So it must not have been that big of an expense for them. He says in episode 3 of season 1, Peacemaker references Doll Man, and when asked about it on the podcast, Gunn makes what seems like a spur of the moment decision to confirm Doll Man exists in the DCU. He then goes on to clarify that Batmite is not canon in the DCU, since there's a big difference between confirming the existence of a shrinking guy and an interdimensional imp. Some cool tidbits, but nothing earth-shattering. Yeah. And again, I know that people are trying to comb through, the podcast, and others have their issues about a podcast even being necessary in order to determine what is canon and what isn't. I still feel like as fans, we overblow canon way too much. And quite honestly, I don't really give a shit about it. Whatever is canon, we will find out in season 2. Like going forward, it's like, oh, okay, so there's that and there's this. All right, whatever. Like, I'm fine with them setting the rules going forward from Peacemaker season 2. And I feel like the vast majority of people feel the same way. But for people who really want to, connect and go through whatever tidbits he gives on this podcast, hey, so be it. I mean, that's why the podcast is there. That's why it exists in that regard. So either way. But finally, he says, and now Star Trek. He says, I watched Suddenly Human. Yes, Suddenly Human. Random question. He says, but when you rewatch a Star Trek show, do you watch the intro with Space the Final Frontier monologue? I watch it every time. It's just too iconic for me to hit the skip intro button. Well, I don't watch, when I rewatch the show, I watch it on Pluto TV, so there's no fast forward. So I just, obviously let it play. But I mean, it's not a bad thing. Like, it's soothing. And I dig the orchestrals, right? Like, and I would say that for every Star Trek series save Enterprise. And Enterprise is one that I need to go back and watch all the way through fully because I haven't, but all the other ones I've watched all the way fully, and they all have really awesome orchestral themes. And yeah, I just dig all of them and have no issues listening to that music. Like it's a good get you in a good mindset for what you're about to watch for the next 45 minutes. So yeah, if I was watching it digitally, I would not skip the intro like ever. I'm with you on that one. He says Jono was frustrating to listen in this one, and that just shows you how corrupted his mind was by the Talarians. Yes, he was very frustrating, especially when they did that chanting thing, that droning, and also the I don't know what you categorize that type of music he was listening to. I mean, I know it was Talarian music, but I mean, what is it like? This crazy tripped out electronic metal that just was screechy. Like I don't know. But yeah, I hear you. Very, very frustrating in many ways. He says Interstellar Racquetball looks pretty fun. Yeah, we see that a couple times more. I think in TNG and definitely also in DS9 as well. I think we see it a couple of times, but yeah, always intriguing to see how they advance sports that we've come to know and understand even in our world. He says the banana split scene and Data's reaction was pretty funny. Yeah, that was another scene where, like, and them trying to, like, impart, like, more, like, humanity and, like, joviality into Jono's life, like, trying to integrate him and show him, like, how awesome it could be to be human, right? Like, it ties into the framework of the actual episode itself. And yeah, that's definitely that was Data's learning of slapstick humor in that regard, right? In the midst of all the other lessons he has with respect to being more human. He says, I really thought the scene where Jonah was stabbing Picard was going to turn out to be a nightmare, and apparently so did Picard, since as soon as he wakes up in the infirmary, he asks if it was just a dream. I was surprised when the show returned from commercial break to see the stabbing had actually happened. Yeah, to me, I don't remember that being like a surprise when I initially saw it. I think it was literally like a shocking, like, WTF, like, what is going on here? Like, oh my goodness, this is not good, right? Like, he's the reversion, like, what's happening, that type of thing. So, yeah, that was, I don't remember. I mean, the scene itself was shocking, but I don't remember thinking that it was a dream. But yeah, no, it was one of the more visceral parts of the episode for sure. He says next episode is Remember Me, Live Long and Prosper, Alex. That one I remember a lot more than Suddenly Human, truthfully. I've seen it. I mean, it's not necessarily like, a fan favorite episode, but it's definitely one that, like, it's a Crusher centric episode. I'll put it that way. It's a Dr. Crusher centered episode, and it's an intriguing Dr. Crusher centered episode. The premise of it is interesting, but yeah, I don't know. We'll see how you feel about that one, Alex, as we get into the fourth season here, and the show. I think at this point, like, it really has found its groove, but there's still some things here with respect to a 26 episode season where it's like, okay, some here, some there, as far as, like, stronger stories than others in that regard. And there's some episodes in the fourth season that you haven't gotten into yet that you will. It'll be very intriguing to see reactions to that indeed. But thank you as always for the feedback, good sir. Greatly appreciate it. Looking forward to more thoughts with respect to Star Trek and everything else, good sir. And that is going to do it for this particular episode of Flight Chat, a much lighter, more manageable episode of the show, no doubt about that, than we had prior. But thank you to everybody who sent in feedback. Thank you to John for his feedback. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to Alex. Thank you to Phil Barker. And thank you, of course, to Sam Otten in that regard for all the feedback that you all sent in this particular week. Like I said, if we ever get into overflow territory again, we'll just have to do a second episode of feedback that we'll probably do either like the next day or later in the week at some point if we get to that point. But either way, we'll try and keep it certainly significantly under 5 hours. We don't need to be longer than Zack Snyder's Justice League and or the extended edition of any of the Lord of the Rings movies. As much as we enjoy the feedback, as much as I enjoy reading it, as much as I enjoy having the discussion about it. But if you want to join the feedback circle for later episodes for this next upcoming Flight Chat, you know where to find me on Threads and on Instagram at the Flightcast, on BlueSky like Sam did at Flightcast. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page. You can post underneath the posting for this particular podcast episode of Flight Chat on the Flightcast YouTube page. And of course, it can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care. Stay safe out there. Have a great week, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.